Representative Hayes of Connecticut is recognized.
Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Before I begin, I would like to address a question that the chair of the full committee asked, and none of you had an answer for, just to give it a little context. He asked, how did the federal government shutdown affect school districts, and then followed up by saying it didn't. That is absolutely not true. School districts do not operate budgets on a week-to-week basis. So much of the Title I funds and the IDEA funds that support our special education students had already been dispersed over the summer. So schools were already operating with that. Many school districts, especially Title I districts that rely heavily on federal funding, saw delays in reimbursements for meal programs for their students with free and reduced lunches, and they had to direct funds from other places. We saw around the country Head Start programs that experienced closures or temporarily reduced services. Again, Title I districts saw a halting of federal grant-making opportunities and technical assistance to support them with those grants as they plan for the next year. I can tell you that my friends at the Department of Defense Education Activities, which is DODEA, our military schools, worked for several weeks without being paid, and many of their extracurricular activities were halted. They still showed up, so the students didn't feel the impact. But if you ask them if there was any direct effect from the federal government, I'm sure that their answer would be different. And I think the thing that is most important and incredibly egregious is a constituent of mine who has a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights for a transition program for her severely disabled son who will be graduating soon. And she needs to make sure that his supports are in place as he transitions. And she lost weeks of getting an answer, or at least a meeting or a decision, so that her son can transition out of high school. So for our most impacted students in our most vulnerable school districts, if you ask them if there is any impact for those teachers working in those communities and those administrators trying to plan for the next year, they absolutely felt the effect of the last several weeks. I'm glad we're having this hearing today, but I also understand that this hearing is yet another example to try to make the case for why we do not need a Department of Education. The decision by this administration to cut CTE programs is deeply troubling for me. And I know that the Department of Labor excels at directing federal funds to short-term job training programs. But Ms. Rice, I listened to your testimony, and you talked about these programs as being a first experience, exploration, career development. Those are all things that educators do. I know this because I am an educator, if you can't tell already, but a person who has a cybersecurity background could not educate your students in the way that you did. In the way that you do, could not align that work to the standards, could not make sure that they're exploring and having a club and different opportunities. Ms. Gasper, you talked about many of your students, the percentage that go on to the military. In my school, every student enrolled in a Perkins program also took the ASVAB tests, the practice test, and the actual test, and their guidance counselors aligned them with the classes to make sure that if they didn't pass it the first time, they would pass it on their subsequent attempts. All of those things happen in schools, and there should be conversation and collaboration between business and the workplace, but teaching is a profession, and it is different. And just because someone runs a business doesn't mean that they can teach young people to love a career or have opportunities to explore, to fail and try again. So I have a lot of questions, but I already know the answer to many of these questions, so a lot of this is rhetorical for me. What we should be doing on this committee is finding ways to match teachers with partners in the business world so that they can bring that real life experience in real time to keep them updated. But we would be hard pressed to think that someone who runs a successful business could stand in front of a classroom of high school students and transfer that knowledge and allow those kids to grasp that information. So, Ms. Christie, I really appreciate what you said about you don't care where the money comes from, you just want to make sure it's there and available for kids. But I hope you hold firmly to the last part of CTE, and that is the education part, and our kids deserve that aspect. My time is up. I have no questions.